We're going to get started here in just a moment. I'd like you to raise your hand if you can hear me. Thank you, Gail. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I am Allison Kossman with Pinnacle Wealth Management, and I'll be moderating today's webinar, Mythbusting 529 Plans. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. If you have dialed in by phone, please select phone call on the audio panel and enter the audio pin provided to eliminate any echoing. You have joined this webinar in listen-only mode. You will have the opportunity to submit any questions into the questions pane during the presentation in the control panel. You may send your questions at any time, and we will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to introduce Tom Stefaniak.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on Mythbusting 529 Plans. As I was introduced, I'm Tom Stefaniak here with Pinnacle Wealth Management in Denver, Colorado. Our mission here at Pinnacle Wealth is to build relationships focused on your best interest using tailored planning and investment advice to help you aim toward your personal and financial goals. And on that theme, we're going to be talking about 529 plans. We do this quite a bit with a lot of clients. And in terms of financial goals, saving for a child or even a grandchild's education is often only second to retirement savings. We're going to go through several myths that we've heard over the years and hopefully debunk some of them. Some of them have some truth to them, so it kind of helps to walk through what's the truth and what's the myth. The first chart we have here, I'm going to talk a little bit about the green bars. Saving for college can start really at any point. Obviously, the earlier you begin saving, the more the money can grow, just the power of compounding. So let's start with that $350 per month for college savings. When they start doing that when the child's age 10, you could accumulate close to $43,000 by the time the child is age 18. Now contrast this with starting when they're born, and we're now talking $135,000 to accumulate by their 18th birthday. Big difference, starting a little bit earlier. On the other side is the blue bar chart, and we're kind of working the opposite way. Instead of have a set contribution, you have a set ending value in mind. Could be perhaps the cost of a tuition at a specific school. We're talking about $150,000 by age 18. You'd have to do $1,221 if you're starting when the child is age 10, as opposed to if you do it as a newborn, it's only $387 per month. Big difference in monthly savings. You can invest in any 529 plan that you want to in any state. In some states actually allow some type of tax deduction, and that includes Colorado, where I live, and so there's some tax benefits associated with those. That's why normally you want to look at your state's 529 plan first. There could be some type of state income tax deduction that you could get for making those contributions, and that's tremendous. The second fact is 529 plan assets are not restricted to your individual state. And this is a very important part. You can use the assets at any eligible school, basically one that's accredited for financial aid around the country. That includes 2- and 4-year colleges, graduate school, including law school, medical school, vocational, and technical schools. On a side note, I actually went to the list of Colorado eligible schools just the other day, and there's over 100 schools listed in the state of Colorado alone. Actually, kind of a side note, the interesting part is the very first one listed is the Academy of Natural Therapy. It's a massage therapy school in Greeley, Colorado. So don't think of just the major universities. It's pretty much any accredited post-secondary education where you can use the 529 plans. One of the big myths is I make too much money to qualify for a 529 plan. There are no income limitations at all. Now, opposed to maybe a Coverdell education savings account that do have income restrictions, 529 plans have no income restrictions whatsoever. In fact, you can do what we call accelerated gifts. Normally, $14,000 per year per gift giver, per receiver, is normally the limit. But there is an allowance of doing a 5-year lump sum up front. So for the people doing math, $14,000 times 5 is $70,000. You could put a $70,000 lump sum in right away, and then you obviously can't contribute for the next few years. But that's an option as well. Obviously, you need to talk to your tax advisor to see how that would be handled. You have to file some extra paperwork to tell the IRS that you're doing an accelerated gifting, but perfectly legal, and depending on your state, very nice tax deduction. Myth number 4, if my child decides not to go to college, I lose the assets in the account. Absolutely false. Unlike other college savings plan, the 529, the account owner controls the account. And this is very important. Most of the time, the account owner is either the parents or the grandparents. And this means you can change the beneficiary to a other, we call it eligible family member. So you can change it to a brother or a sister. You could roll it up to a parent. You could roll it down to a grandchild. So it's a pretty easy way to change the beneficiary and still use the funds for someone else's college education. We see this quite a bit if we end up funding enough for child number 1 and you roll the funds into child number 2's account. 529 plans are for kids only. Really, there's no age restriction at all on 529 plans. Anyone can use a 529 plan to save for higher education, including possibly graduate school, going back for vocational or technical schools. In fact, the account owner can be the beneficiary as well. We actually had one of our clients recently did not use all of their kids' 529 plan assets, and now we're considering changing the beneficiary to the mom. And mom is looking at going back to school to get her MBA. So we're going to use the funds for mom instead. Myth number 6, you can use 529 plans for tuition only. And this is a big one. This is probably one of the biggest misnomers. Actually, 529 plans can be used for educational expenses. Obviously, we're talking tuition, room and board, fees, books and supplies. If the university requires the child to get a computer, that's included as well as an educational expense. So you can pretty much practically use it for any expenses. And I'm even going beyond that, is that when we talk about room and board, you can actually use it for off-campus housing, as long as the off-campus housing is less expensive than the dorms. If they're more expensive than the dorms, then you can only take amount up to the cost of a dorm room. And we actually have several people doing this as well. So more than just tuition, basically any eligible college expenses. Investing in a 529 plan lowers the chance of qualifying for financial aid. This is kind of true, but not really. And this is probably one of the big ones we talk to people about as well. The 529 plan assets have a relatively small effect on federal financial aid eligibility because they're considered the assets of the account owner. So therefore, if it's mom and dad's account ownership, the family only has a 5.6% accredited to the college expense. So it's relatively a minor amount. If the accounts are set up in the grandparent's name for the grandchild, then 0% of that is counted for against financial aid. So a little bit of truth to it, but quite frankly, not a big impact on the financial aid form itself. Myth number 8, If my child receives a scholarship, I lose the money in the account. Simply not true. The reason why is mom and dad own the account. And therefore, if you don't use it for college expenses because they have a scholarship one way or the other, you could use the funds, again, to transfer to another child or grandchild. You could decide to say, you know what, I didn't need it for college, therefore I'm going to take the money out and spend it on something else, on a boat or whatever. You'd have to, it would be called a non-qualified withdrawal. That's the terminology. You have to pay a 10% penalty on the withdrawal, and obviously the tax on any gain that you've had, but not a big issue, quite frankly. I call it a tax-deferred investment that you might have to pay a tax or a penalty on, but you could use it for, in essence, anything else besides education if you wish. That's the account owner's choice. Myth number 9 is better to save in a custodian UGMA or UTMA account. Probably should stop and explain those letters. UGMA is the Uniform Gift to Minors account, and the UTMA is the Uniform Transfer to Minors accounts. These were popular probably 15 or 20 years ago as the sole source of way of funding money out of mom and dad's accounts into the kids' accounts. Not as prevalent as much anymore. The reason it was used years ago is that the money that were in the UGMA or UTMA accounts were taxed at the child's rate. Now that's no longer the case. Now they're taxed at the parent's rate up to the child is up age 24. So all the tax advantages associated with these accounts are going away, and they've pretty much nullified all of that. So they've actually done this many times where an old account that's in a UGMA or UTMA account, we roll over to a 529 plan, and you get some tax deferral and potentially tax-free withdrawals from the 529 plan. So like those a lot. Only a parent can be the 529 plan account owner. With few exceptions, really there are no limitations on account owners or beneficiaries. It could be a trust, a corporation, a custodial account, anybody with a valid tax ID. But quite frankly, the most popular other owners, if you will, are the grandparents, followed by the aunts and uncles. So that's pretty popular as well. I'm the only one who can contribute to a 529 plan, the individual account owner. Actually, anybody can contribute to anybody's 529 plan. As long as it's been set up, one account owner can be set up, but other family members and friends can contribute to it. I will pause, though, for a second and say if you are making a contribution to someone else's 529 plan, there might not be a tax deduction associated with this. You probably have to talk with your tax advisor to see how you can document if you've made a contribution to someone else's 529 plan. So consult your tax advisor is important here. Here's some disclosure notices you probably want to take a look at. So 529 plans are, quite frankly, excellent tools to save for college. You make contributions to 529 plans. Depending on your state plan, you might actually get a tax deduction to make the contribution. All the money grows tax deferred within the 529 plan. And if you pull the money out to use it for college expenses, potentially all of those distributions are tax-free, and that's tremendous. Now, college costs are going up at nearly double the inflation rate, and that has been going on for the last 30 or 40 years, and that hasn't changed. Please consider us a great resource to help your family provide for college planning. I'm kind of pausing here and seeing if there's any questions that anyone has. If so, I need you to type into the queue your question. And Allison's shaking her head at me that I'm telling you it wrong. So I'll let Allison explain how to ask a question.
Thank you, Tom. We do have a question from Gail. She's asking for one of her clients. Are all 529 plans alike?
Actually, that's a great question because each individual state has their own 529 plan. So there are literally 50 529 plans here in the U.S. I would first have you take a look at your own individual state 529 plan. The reason why is several states, including Colorado, allow you to get a state income tax deduction for any contribution to a 529 plan. So look at your state plan first. That is by far the first choice. If your state plan offers a tax deductible contribution, probably want to look at that as the primary one. If your state does not offer a tax deduction, then you have the option of looking all around and finding the best performing investment. So different choices there. I know in Colorado anything you put into a 529 plan is deductible. I have a lot of family back in Wisconsin, and they only allow a maximum of a $2,000 deduction. So if you're making more than a $2,000 deduction, then you have to decide if you still want to stay with Wisconsin's plan or move to a different state plan. Obviously, talking to your tax advisor is very important to make sure you understand what is deductible and what is not deductible.
Thanks, Tom. And I'm not seeing any other questions. Does anyone else have a question? Please either type in your question or raise your hand. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions, so thank you everyone for attending today's Mythbusting 529 Plan webinar. If you have any further questions after this webinar is over, just please give us a call or email Tom. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would really appreciate it if you would complete that and provide your feedback, as this is our first webinar. You will also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to review the recording of today's webinar. On behalf of Pinnacle Wealth Management, thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.